야, 다들이 니만 이버디 양 아주 양자도스 다 소요리 엔다 가서 시스버너시 아니 산제베 최디 대마 롱아도 네그리사치 또 순요리 다 간다 로니도 다 하시 또 심버리 제다 시추루 몽고 지기 야지 야제드라데 야마 쿠드라로 데데 다 용되게 요리 산제베 최디 패실 tempo 싶으시냐 되고 소리지. 다 하고 드리께서 애네 누추 유주나나 당아 애네 사제가 치 매세 유르스는 알로네 돈하러 제대하지 용되기도가 사진지기 뒤줄이야 말아도돼 로동자가 정도 전된되게 전장 나마 인데고 말아도다 지기 그게 내주 시베타네 에 맞아도 투뭉 에 좀된데게 추즈디 자볼리디가래야 지 안도보도 내버 여디디 그게 무튼이 나야다 양지 벌거 냠버도 되디 지금 냠버 소르추트야 지기本来家伙不要送给宇宙，看蒙古去了，跑个带不到是娘苗的，当然第一的也是娘毛说了去，没用恐怖用的也这个，现在的没那么就这个月，哎，吃着那么多的广播讲，哎，天明给他听个三节回去，找没得的这个。산제베 나로리아 semkamribe 거도 저다 아니 떠주 거도 저디 비쇼지기다 다시부터 띵서우신 예외인도산에 야 최대 유명한 마트베 도나층에 용대요리 다 들으시기 뒤주데 나서 냐라 좀 된데게 전화 직교인부터 야 나서 상월로 지 파수식 저치야디 그저 투도 그다 숙처를 따네 아니 다 남지 쇼다로 제외이나 빨리 주유다 레자기 주유제네 다 도스요리 저사 아니 그런 거라도 도스식 저 융접에 소리지 다 가서 빨리 주유다 아니 레자기 주유 엔디 아주 망스프게다 졸랭이 치아로 죽나 판도된데 연구를 다들 그 도시된이야 매 타일랜드 그게 또야 지기 디네로 춘주시도 시야래 나대 사가시 심벌이 또 디서로 제는 아주 다 지 빨리 추진중에다 레자가 추진중에서 아주 지기 저것도 보고 서울까지다 아니 혈류 제제 아니 졸랭 디지털나 단대 판도 연구를 근데 저는 들으지 않다 야 저번에 시작은도 어디
Today we are meeting for the second day, and it's wonderful to meet with you again here. We are all followers of one and the same Buddha, and we spoke about some of the key aspects of the Buddha's teaching yesterday. And generally, there is the understanding in the Buddhist texts that the Buddha's teaching will last for 5,000 years on this earth. And already more than 2,000 years have passed. So of course, historically, if you look across human history, we will see different religious traditions come into being and at some point decline and disappear and so on and so forth. But we are now living through a time where actually, if you look at the history of the Buddhist tradition as a whole seems to be actually quite stable, quite firm. And especially in the historically traditional Buddhist countries, like all of us, we have been followers of the Buddha for over 1,000 years in each of our traditions. So in these traditional Buddhist countries, the Buddhist tradition is very strong. And furthermore, we are now living through a time where there is a growing interest in Buddhism and the Buddha's teaching in the West as well, which historically has not been a place where the Buddha Dharma has flourished. So in this kind day and age, when there is a growing interest in different parts of the world beyond the historically traditional Buddhist countries and societies, it is important, I feel, on the part of us who are followers of the Buddha, disciples of the Buddha, and students of the Buddha historically, to be able to really think beyond our own individual specific traditions and think of Buddha Dharma as a whole, and think about how the Buddha Dharma as a whole could continue flourish. And part of that, it is important for the followers of the Buddha, the students of the Buddha, to have closer understanding, closer contact. And of course, it is very desirable, but to be honest, up to this point, the relationship and the contacts could be done more. We could see better contacts, more contacts. And part of that contact has to involve deeper appreciation and understanding of each other's traditions, and which may involve through communication, dialogue, so on and so forth. So here, that's one thing that I would really like to suggest. And then, on my part, I also pray that the Buddha Dharma continues for a long time. And there are parts of the world, including, Tibet, China, and Mongolia, in historically Buddhist regions where, due to tragic situations, Buddha Dharma has declined due to external, internal factors. And in these areas, on my part, I pray that the Buddha Dharma that has declined be revived and flourish. And on your part as well, as fellow Buddhist, in your prayer, please remember the fellow Buddhists who are suffering in these different parts of the world where historically Buddhist traditions flourished, but now are going through decline. And so please pray for this. And and furthermore, I feel that generally when we talk about the followers of the Buddha, I talk broadly in terms of two major traditions, the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition. And that's one way of looking at the two main streams of Buddha Dharma, the Buddhist tradition that survives today. And the dialogue between these two are important. For example, on my part, I visit the Bodh Gaya temple quite often, the stupa quite often, and there is a Thai temple and a monastery there. And as part of my pilgrimage to the Bodh Gaya, I also have the opportunity to interact with the Thai fellow Buddhists over there. So these kind of dialogue, I think, is really important. And for these dialogues, we actually also need to be more patient, to allow more space so that one can really delve deeper into understanding each other's interpretation of the Dharma. And also one thing that we have to remember is that in many parts of the world, beyond people who are taking interest in Buddhism as a religious teaching, there are also many people in the world who are looking at Buddhism for its deep psychology, teachings on psychology, teachings on philosophy, the science of mind, and not necessarily relating to Buddhism as a religion, but Buddhism as a source of knowledge, as a source of teaching, as a source of insight. And in these, in this kind of time, I think it is important for us, Buddhists, while helping fellow Buddhists to continue to flourish the Dharma, but also serve this broader community, the secular world, where people are looking at Buddhism as a source of spiritual resources, teaching, insights, and so on. So I think the key point here is that we need more interaction and contact among ourselves first.
Oh yeah. 当然了的，这么影响很多的嘛，我的拍摄龙，他是成个就的，的嘛是到处录音的，巴黎街头马斯的，巴掌那苏的，拍街头这么影响是不多清楚，南无大师巴嘎瓦多阿拉哈多三亚三不得谁。 좀 전에 자정보 양다 보소버 상제 달라 차차로스 되게 다게 되고 되지는 좀 전에 전민년도 전민년 번남지 총대 karmasa dharma shejawana shukso tere 좀 전에 이 결혼나라 가자와 결혼다 제소스 결혼 되다 남지 좀 된다로 서버 숨바 시소 좀되게 이게 가서와 결혼다 심전남 나버 답을 잡아다 양에 다 명한도 보다래 양다 원다와 잡아도 동료와도 이메되와다 누버 잡아다 리베 또버 잡아다 양에 렌다와 무슨도 잡아질 저버지게 남는 디인데스 오다 간다 denshi 동해 시버서 꾸주방어서 고봉원도 저서야게다 고den원도 지하디 승구도가 에네 간다 냐라 녀몽문주 봐도 고내야체 르가 이승구 니주 라포조 직동 되는 조조 에네 간다 성로던 요다네 에네 띵지글레 시체 애니 시르글라와 담에다고 시르글라와 곰니 애니 가다 섬려야 교태야지기 어디 숨기요래 라고 숨기냐네 사진제 인도 명한도 못달래 양다 원다가 저것도 동요도 이메도도 누버 저것도 리퀘츠 또버셔와다 냥에 랜다오 무슨도 저 저버시고 라면 디인디스 강 대니 저번야워 셔고 시우스 시우 강신의 결론다 데르 결론 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다 이 메데오 넘버 3에 르르 제수 다신 나왔다 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다 이 메데오 넘버 3에 초나로 제수 다신 나왔다 뜸보 시신 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다 이 메데오 넘버 3에 성로 제수 다신 나왔다 뜸보 시신 뜸보 시신제 참보던 데면 직진기 나왔습니다 이 메데오 넘버 3에 철로 제수 다신 나서 결론다 시들 결론이 르르 제수 다신 나서 결론다 안되나 결론은 공부로 송함 신주도 송함 강도도 송의 기무중 제대 르 정부 상신 전부 전부를 갖춰대 나서스 다 그러냐 르긴 둘루디디 지금 남나게 출된 데서도 송거리 다 되는 조 나네 民族的啊，就是这样的做的意义上了大呢。我到虽然在的他们伢了，金木中间的绿长不上去，长不卡巧的那时候，但呢，产生的我不是说的，产生的我全知道，我人都我呢，我人都我说娘都养到我记得我些时候都写说，我人都穷呢，我人都穷我娘都养到我记得我些时候都写说，我通我呢。我通过我所娘都养到我记得我些时候都写说，我通过穷呢，我通过穷我娘都养到我记得我些时候都写说，绿的他们这养到我娘心，我所娘都老了去了，绿的他们这养到我娘心，碰我娘都老了去都是，绿的都是。信徒讲呢，我说娘都老不吃的，旅行都是信徒讲呢，从我娘都老不吃的，给老长在这边呢，咋一年呢，开外胖了高完呢，人都说那样，人都说我娘都肉都写说，通过说那样，通过说我娘都肉都写说，给老大，太信徒给老呢，人都我们呢，人。我说人都我说娘都养到我起早些时候都写说，人都穷那样，人都穷我娘都养到我起早些时候都写说，通过我呢，通过我说娘都养到我起早些时候都写说，通过穷呢，通过穷我娘都养到我起早些时候都写说，绿的他们这养到我娘心，我说我娘都。老不切到，绿的他们这养到我我心，妈的绿的他们这养到我娘心，碰我娘都老不切到，绿的都是信徒讲呢，我说娘都老不切到，绿的都是信徒讲的，从我娘都老不切到，但是呢，哪个绿了，绿的结束大学那边有了，去绿了，绿的结束大学那边有了。派哪个律师的物体送给有啥的，去绿了绿的就是大型那玩意儿，哪的去绿了绿的，那绿的就是大型那玩的，绿了根据确实结束，确实结束大型那玩的，绿了几个确实结束大型那玩，绿了根据我的几个结束大型那玩意儿，他了绿有多娘都其实你就写吧上。당 소소 참보삼 소소 참보삼도 참바냐와 나바 주신 대범매바 나바던 지대나 가야 냐와를 뭐 미치도 결론다 대달 결론이 류기 제수 다시 나와요 결론다 샤야 결론이 존나다 조냐도 저도写서 답에 때도 전시돼야 송구도가 그다 파교 전에 선 진리기 저랑 가르쳐 드제 돈하게 매버신이 간연을 당 매버셔 류기 저랑 가르쳐 나게 맞춰 가르쳐 어느 조조 이게 남도 강조가 되디 전시 선보시는 조거리스 어디 송구도 저는 다 정원념도 저도 싫어 누구는 다 누구 냐도 저도 싫어 냐와는 다 냐로 냐도 저도 싫어 대일륜이 지저 저도 잡고 되네 대서 저도 싫어 대서는 난게 류를 류지 저도 다시 내봐다 치류를 류지 저도 다시 내봐다 난게 류를 치류를 류지 저도 다시 내봐다 류를 군도 중 취지 저도 다시 내봐다 류는 집에 취지 저도 다시 내봐다 류를 근중하던 집에 주서 다시 나와야겠노. 달로 류 여도 냐도 치시 니도 셰바선도 소소 잡아선도 잡아냐와 나와 주신. 대범해봐 나와 지대나 가야 냐와를 뭐 미치도 결론다. 대다라 결론을 류를 류지 주서 다시 나와야겠노. 결론다. 샤양 결론이 로도 도바. 시신도 제보다 중세 때보다 넘버 때보 시신도 제보다 구보다 장어 시신도 제보다 남자도 최고도 홍수 장어 시신도 제보다 서보다 통어다 최보다 양보 시신도 제보다 상어도 지외래 시신도 제보다 송어도 대보 장어도 독보다 냐어도 매년어도 뭐도 미모원 시신도 진짜 대단 난게 룰러 결론도 대단 결론을 룰러 지수 룰러 류지 지수 다시 내봐요 결론도 샹양 결론기 니 류디니라 강베티 연세 자당고 면세나 빠빠로 투고보도 메서 나서에 강화 양다고 지도하신도 소소 도대스 다 류메서 신이 봐 그러다 아니 동요를 신이 버디도 저 살롱 거인 그러고 다가다 류 도쟁이 님이 삼 되네 봐 대연도 근중기 아니 생부 초에 터네 아니 생두 못이고요 다 뒤에도 시연도 달은 녀부 여더매 녀부 때도 여더매 녀부 때 여나 녀부 컨디스된 거예요 어디 뒤에 그림 뭐는 뭐는지 좀 보지 그 그림 제도가
So let me read a little bit from the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. So the Sutta begins with the preamble, setting the context where the Sutta discourse was given. So this is in the land of Kurs, in a place called Karmasadama. And then the Sutta opens with the statement in exchange between the Buddha and the Sangha members who were there. And then the first opening of the Sutta after the preamble sets up a very important passage where the Buddha says that there is amongst this one way to the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and sadness, for the gaining of the right path, for the realization of Nibbana. That is to say, the four foundations of mindfulness. So in this opening sentence or a passage, the core of the Buddha's teaching is summed up, particularly what is the final goal of the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma. The final goal of the Dhamma is the attainment of cessation in the form of Nibbana. And here, and the way, the actual path by which one attains that Nibbana is articulated in the form of, although not explicitly stated here, but in the form of what is known as the threefold training. And the threefold training is a very progressive practice where we begin with first restraining the gross levels of negative actions of body, speech, and mind by applying mindfulness and clear knowing, awareness. And then by applying these two faculties, we begin to exercise restraint on the expressions of the afflictions, such as attachment, anger, and so on. So the first level is application of these on the level of body and speech. And then we move on to the next practice, which is the second training, which is the training in concentration. And the concentration, at that point, we are now beginning to deal with our mind beyond body and speech. We're dealing with the mind. And part of that training involves first cultivating the ability to apply our mind and attain some attentional focus. So that's part of the training. And the concentration or samadhi is like the basis, the foundation. And the actual practice is really prajna, wisdom. And then the wisdom of no self or wisdom of shunyata, emptiness, is the core content. The essence of the path is really the wisdom, the training and wisdom. So this opening passage really presents this entire path in an implicit way by pointing out what is the ultimate goal of the Dhamma, the path of Dhamma. So then Buddha goes on to explain what the four foundations of mindfulness practice are. He begins by explaining the importance of adopting the right body posture finding a quiet place for practice, and finding, sort of first beginning to discipline your body and adopt a certain posture so that you can settle your mind. And then the practice goes on to first the introduction to the mindful breathing, the mindful breathing. And the mindful breathing is explained in a quite detailed way by bringing awareness to the actual act of breathing in, breathing in long, breathing out long, breathing in short, breathing out, out short. So every time we breathe, depending upon the pace of the breath, you maintain your awareness. So the two faculties that are being applied here are sati or smriti, mindfulness, and samprajñana, which is the meta-awareness, or sometimes translated also as clear awareness. So these are the two faculties that are being applied in focused on the breath. And then the text then goes on to explain about, how by choosing, taking the breath as the object of meditation, one begins to then bring deeper awareness and mindfulness, and then contemplation of body as body, and abiding with that mindfulness. And then the text moves on to explaining the importance of how we need to bring that mindfulness and awareness, not only when we are sitting in a practice, but also in everyday life. And then it talks about the 4 postures of the body: when lying down, when standing up, when moving, and when sitting down. So, and it goes into detail, but the point here is that the mindfulness and meta-awareness, or samprajñana, has to be applied constantly, because we know from our personal experience that a lot of the problems and mental agitations really come when we are not able to exercise some discipline on our mind. We let our mind to run free, run without discipline, unrestrained, and then all sorts of problems arise. So although paying attention to the body is important, and the attention to the body is a way of training your mind, so that ultimately the main aim is to really apply mindfulness and meta-awareness on the mind itself, moving from body to feeling, then to mind. So I think this is where, and then in the sutta, example is given, how do we train this awareness? And one of the examples given here is how a potter, an expert potter, spins the wheel and is aware that whether the hair spin hard, which would spin for long, whether hair spin short, which will spin for less time. And the potter, through the expertise, knows what kind of spinning he or she has done. So in the same manner, a meditator will be able to maintain the mindfulness and meta-awareness in a disciplined manner. So in this way, what is happening here is the instruction to us that we need to apply mindfulness and awareness, at the level of our body, at the level of our speech, in relation to our speech, and most importantly, in relation to our mind, in relation to our mind. So as part of the, mindfulness on the body, there is also a more detailed explanation on how we can do this by, looking at different aspects of the body, different constituents that make up our body, and not only listing them, but also reflecting upon their nature as, foulness and made of, impure substances. And the point here is to really remind us the truth of suffering. The existence, existence in samsara is conditioned by suffering. So the truth of suffering, and the truth of suffering, by reflecting on suffering, it will lead to inquiry into what is the origin of suffering. Why are we in this situation where we are now? And through, inquiring into the origin of suffering, we will find that the origin of suffering lies not outside, it lies within us. It's in our mind, it's in our emotions. So once we recognize that, then the question is asked, is there a way to bring about an end to the origin of suffering, thereby bringing an end to the suffering? And that opens up to the question of, asking about nibbana or cessation, nirod. And in this way, what you find here is actually a very an approach that is very close to the actual way things work in the world. This whole kind of approach of the path is the suffering and its origin, searching for its cure, and the healing, and where does that healing come from, which is the path. And in this way, if you think about the teaching of the Buddha as encompassed in this kind of teaching, there is something very remarkable that is actually very close to the way reality itself is.
소소타는 도디 아주 지 양원망의 소송 코돌이야 냐다 잘해요나 링시점때 신 흘려요나 아니 지금 판바연제 항마연제 또 썼던야지 아니 고코면 코돌이야 아니 야네 코돌이야 소소타는 도 개발을 동거래선 또 순요리 세상 아래는 차샤네 소소타는 도디 차상 스비 전에다 아니 마타 임베 야네 거돌이야 도 개발이 또 떠야지 또 대가다 에네 결론기 지금 로차 녀도 베데 쉬우지 14호지 송도가 어디디 소소타는 도 개발이 아주 소송 거돌이야 자신이 던 거야 지기 로다도스레 다 되게 결론기 제 로차 년도 저些참물로지나 소용 것도가 다 들으시리.
So, talking about this importance of applying mindfulness and, awareness to everyday activity, particularly for the monastic members, here it is important to recall that as part of our monastic vows, every fortnightly, we have to participate in a confession ceremony. So the tradition is during the confession ceremony, the abbot, the senior, Sangha member has to recite the Pratimoksha Sutra. And if there is a rush, at least the preamble part of the Pratimoksha Sutra has to be chanted, if possible, the entire sutra. And so in the Tibetan tradition, during the fortnightly ceremony, regardless of whatever version of length it is, the Pratimoksha Sutra is chanted. And the 13th Dalai Lama, my predecessor, actually really kind of emphasized to the monastic community that at least during the rainy season retreat, at least once the entire long Pratimoksha Sutra should be chanted as part of the confession ceremony. And this is something that I do. I also had the opportunity to memorize the whole Pratimoksha Sutra myself. And at least once a year during the rainy season retreat, I chanted in the congregation. So if you look at the Pratimoksha Sutra, it's very detailed in the way in which monastic members are advised to bring mindfulness and awareness into everyday activity. It lists literally all the aspects of activity among a monastic member engages in. It's very detailed. So these really are, of course, explaining the precepts, but the most importantly, it is explaining how it is important to maintain awareness and mindfulness as a monastic member throughout, our day and night, by applying these kind of faculties to our everyday action.
나가서 루주 지인이 패실링을 시비유 고고메 자가식 살아야 아니 고고메다 아니 dansasolya yane kodolo sosotabon dojaba tongore saji dos tembem na yins 现在的俺样马上了，七件上班民主罗是啊，这老样上了呀，那个都是现在跟着过后面的领是了，就是学校的这样的送下，现在我的眼的叔叔他们都结巴的落了心，听个别人差几你是等不来，开车的但是说，原来可多了都结巴。예와도 던 거를 센도스 그 호메다 땜뱀 남버리 저는 알아줬다 야네 거도리야 대서 숨그 선배 지다 대서 쳐가지고 야네 거도로 소소다번 너 제가 막도는 뭐 어떠냐지 어디 다 도시대요
So
대나로 에네 간다 지금 조차 년도 그 결론을 지하디디 비 실사고 시우지 송도가 어다디 소소사도 아주 로르신 에네 지금 마타 임베 이 안에 그도로 도제와 차상시마도 송까지 디 개시불이셔.
So this is a kind of a story, but it was my own late tutor, Gyabje Rinpoche, who was informed by the 13th Dalai Lama, the predecessor, the Dalai Lamas, who told Ling Rinpoche that one of the things that the 13th Dalai Lama has done is to really institute the tradition that the major monasteries should at least once a year during the rainy season retreat have the senior member recite the long Pratimoksha Sutra. And the important point here is that when you recite the Pratimoksha Sutra, you cannot read it. You have to chant it from heart. So whoever is going to be the senior member who chants the Pratimoksha Sutra, it has to be done from heart. That's the historical tradition. So in my own case, I was able to do it once in Tibet before we left. But in India, I've had the opportunity to chant this several times. And I also have asked the major monastic universities in the Tibetan community, particularly the three large monastic universities that are re-established in South India, as well as many other major monasteries. I have asked them to make sure that the tradition that the 13th Dalai Lama has established to have the extensive Pratimoksha Sutra chanted by heart by the senior member during the rainy season retreat be observed. So this is what is happening here today, which I'm happy to know. But the point is that if you look at the Pratimoksha Sutra as a fully ordained monk, you will recognize that how many aspects of the Pratimoksha Sutra are instructions on how, as a fully ordained monk, one should live one's life on a daily basis, and what kind of mindful awareness one needs to bring in every aspect of the activity in one's life.
디 캠프 년조 가서 소송크도 캠프 캠프랑 로리야 그래서 턴도 모두 맞던 되네 디때 모두 디디 로를 매버도 되디 그냥 디 오면 내대 제부지리야 디 소로 나왔잖아 어다 독선님이 구용사도 제가 나서도 야 가셔 있네 소소하면 도 제가 등기유스 근데 그럴 수 있는 것이 빼도는 등기유스 뒤에야 더서 라라고 차버려.
So given that the tradition historically is for the chanting of the Pratimoksha Sutra be done from heart by the senior member of the monastic congregation, there is also quite a liberal tradition where if the senior member is not able to chant the entire sutra, but there will be others who will pick up where the senior member and the abbot left. So it's not as if one person should be able to chant the entire sutra from heart, from start to finish, but the sutra needs to be chanted in full, and it needs to be chanted from the heart. So that has been the tradition. So sometimes I do hear some Tibetan monasteries saying that we also observe this tradition of having the long sutta chanted during the summer retreat, rainy season retreat. But then they say And then when I asked them, who memorizes it? They said, no, we actually read it from the text. So that's not really how it was historically, the tradition.
Oh, yeah. Also, Gelonzu, and Susu Taban Dodi, Lolia Sinche. What are they? Young among Susan Kodulia, Kazutudugi, Ma, Campbell Ma Song, and the young Toddy, and the net and Womadi to Sunche. The cash of Sharisha.
So this, just to repeat, emphasize, I think this tradition that is part of the monastic life of fortnightly chanting of the Pratimoksha Sutra, and especially when it is chanted the long version, that the senior member, the abbot starts, and then where the senior member abbot needs to take a rest, another elder member takes over. But and this tradition of chanting the Pratimoksha Sutra, at least during the fortnightly ceremony, I think is a beautiful one, and we should make sure that it remains that way.
Yeah, that day and the Tamanishak and the call Teta Nanga Lulu Gelonda, Teta Gelona Lulu Lugi Jesu Dashing, never Gelonda, Shang, Gelon Kenny, Lun Dinila, Gangbe Ti Yense, Jadang, Go, Menshena, Babala Tukabadu, Maison, Nazo Yakan, Yang, Chita was into Sosu Dode, Lun Dilla, Jata Buddha, Samoda Soda, Bokshunda, Shada, Giva the River the Gang, River Gangba the Kamada, Ning the Cheba the Lord, Chimboda, Gimoda, Nyamada, Gangboda, Chisada, Chibada, Paganda, Nada, Chata, Mujuda, Shada, Mishuda, Shada, Luda, Noda, Chusida, Gino, Yodo, Oshi, Galonda, Diddy, Bena, Juna Soja, Kan, Diddy, Soludan, Juda, Mersen, Diudan, Mersen, Tiu, Tang, Dildan, Jinju Soja, Kan, Dini, Midan, Mik Shitty Tana, Dini, the Soluyan on Dini, Druyan on Dini, Mersen, Diuyan on Dini, Mersen, Tuyan on Dini, Tin on Dini, Jawian the shit, Galonda, Tation to Galonga, Lu, Dinila, Gangbe Ti, and Jatan, Go, Menshana, Babala took about the Maison, Nazo, Kawa, Yang, that was Chita was into Susu Tote, Lu, Nila, and Jata Buddha, Shasone, Gina Yodo, Sheta, Nangi Shasone, Galonda, Tether, Galone Lula, Luigi Jesu Tashi never in, Galonda, Shang, Galongan, Lu, Dini, Chita never, Chita, Shawa, Kamji Yang, that was Chita was into Susu Topper Chedi, Lu, Nila, and the Saya, the Chi, the May, the Luka, Yodo, Galon, the Pena, Palan Servant, Palan Server, Loma Cabe, Sun, Palan Sene, Shindu Shambono, Tumbu. Shakti nduk de susu toba tishindu gelonda gelonkeni lu dini chidin neba chidin shakwa kamji yang dakwa chida washindu susu toba chidi lu nila nisaya kamda chuyo kamda maya kamda luga kam yodo ushi dadana nangi lula luji jesu dawa neba tang sheso ne gelonda tishindu geloni lula luji jesu dashi neba yino gelonda shayang pena ditati gelonkeni tujudu poro ro 신의 샤시 럼방 신의 샤니 럼방 신의 샤송 럼방 넘버 반방 넘버 뭐방 오늘 넘버 대방면서 넘버 나버다 통하나 대인이 륜디안 디데비 추전다 디데비로 시전인데 디데볼레 만데보고 시 륜디자 수 대당 조르체도스 대다른 난게 셔서네 결론도 대다 결론이 Lula Luigi Jesu Tashi never yendo. Gelonda Shang Benan did Gelongan to do to ro, Charon on the song, Chulan on the song, Chagut Dagi song, Chakagan on the song, Kinam the song, Dagdagi song, Kungnam the song, Junkidagi song, Sosha Ji, Ribu, Sosha Yirik, Naba Nasodagi song, Tongana, Tayini, Lundian did it with Chujanda. Did the Rashicha Yindi, 디데고래 만데보 시 륜디니장 수 대단 저어셔도 대단 난게 시선에 결론다 대서 결론이 류지 주서 다시 내봐요 결론다 시행 결론께는 두두두 송 보러 리베킹 샤다 차다 제시 기베 저와도 통하나 시선 아마신다 리베킹르도 샤다 차 러지 차고 매시 기베 저와도 통하나 시선 아마신다 리베킹르도 샤다 차다 제시 기베 저와도 통하나 시선 아마신도 리버기고 기베 만져 차다 차는서 나버 토로데 라베 리버는 샤나 강베 리버는 자 샤나 야 롱부 리버 남자 샤나 장아리 리버 남자 샤나 라이 리버 남자 샤나 개베 리버 남자 샤나 시메 리버 남자 샤나 게시 리버 남자 샤나 뿡부 리버 남 샤나 징베 리버 남 샤나 잠베 리버 남 샤나 소이 리버 남 샤나 고요 테바다 테바 샤나 통하나 대니 륜디안 디데비 치잔다 디데비 런시잔데 디데보라 마데보시 륜디니냐 츠 대단 저 체도스 다되기 류 동해의 런시인보디 상당한 것도 봐 아니 류 차셔 도문 디베 런시인보 이드산에 류기 공부디 또 스타트잖아 아니 랑섬을 시기 매도 델리 고알리기도 와. 전에 어디 두스리
So now the sutra then goes on to contemplation of the different aspects of the body that make up our body, and the importance of bringing awareness into the specific parts of our body in a very distinct way. An analogy given here is in a marketplace when you have many different types of varieties of grain, and if you look at each of these, you are able to identify distinctly what types of grain this is. So a meditator, when contemplating the body, looking at the specific parts of the body, identifies and contemplates on the specific parts of body as they are. And furthermore, it points towards understanding that ultimately the body, all of these parts are composed of impure substances, which are not worthy to be attached to, not worthy to be attracted to. And part of that contemplation also involves another aspect, which is to reflect upon how, at the final level, our body is composed of the four elements, the elements of earth, water, fire, and so on. And what we think as a real thing, like a body, something that is independent and solid, is actually divisible in these different elements that make it up together. And then the meditation takes us to contemplation on the charnel ground by looking at body corpse, which is in various different stages of decomposition, as well as body parts that have been kind of cut, split open, and so on and so forth. And the point here is to, by visiting the charnel ground, viewing the body, bringing awareness, being mindful, recognizing the various stages of decomposition that we see, but then relating to it to our own body and say that this body is of the same nature. So this here refers to our own body. This body is of the same nature, will become like that. It is not exempt from that state. So what this is pointing us to is, by using this meditation, contemplation, we are also pointing towards recognizing the nature of suffering, recognizing the nature of suffering. So this is an important point of this kind of meditation. And indirectly, this kind of meditation also points towards the teaching on no self, because underlying our attachment to body is an assumption of some kind of independent body that is out there, that is real, that is worthy to be attached to, that is mine. But when you are able to contemplate on the nature of body being composed of so many parts, so beyond these parts that make up the body, there is no body that is separate from the parts that make it up. So this deconstruction or reduction of body into different parts through contemplation is also a helpful practice for deconstructing our attachment that assumes that there is an independent body that is graspable, that is worthy of attachment. So in this way, it's also pointing towards the teaching on no self, anatta.
대다다 류 잡아내샤스니 류가 나당도 상로던 류를 지 현샤래야로 저저디 수송저지 용서로 되네 개체의 초 잡아내샤 초 대화를 세 초동을 민두부 접지 쳐고 될 때는 상랑 남자기야로 지 현대님도로 차도기야서 저저디 다파 용기의 인도산에 초가 전번이셔. 다삼 땅에 초디도 전에 가서를 보게 또 심도서 상단에 타직도 초 대화를 현대화도 초 등을 민두별로 기아 뜻을 수송 동안 초 전번이셔. 류 전번이셔. 초 전번이셔. 엔데네 다 소디도 드즈젤 때야 됐다 셈기 유기 요인도산에 다제 셈 잡아니 있었어야 되기 애니 봐도 십사로다네 셈기 때문에 더버 애니 가서를 보게 이동하지를 세외 유지를 배 당도래야게 차고 애니 동행어야 그를 옆에 겹기 소안에 면도 겹기 소에 로当落入这里跑到是因为这单去生产不影响但等到嘛呢确产不影响是说呢但这个恰当解释有的是这里跟着是移民跑到修草到了上门当呢生的都的修草到了上门当的说呢呢做是没得这个看到的타르도나 아니 더 우무베 슝네 송야게 다 민섬 다섬 자 디가로 조데게도가 도스션 삼당기요리
So through first contemplating body and cultivating mindfulness based on this already when we do the contemplation, mindfulness of the body, there will be an impact on the lessening of our attachment, because a large part of our attachment is based upon attraction to things that are connected with our body. So that is an important one. But more importantly, after contemplation of the body, one needs to move to feeling, because a part of the problem really comes from our attachment to pleasurable sensations and our natural aversion to unpleasurable experiences and sensation. So we react to the world through this modality of attraction and aversion. And underlying that modality is an attachment towards or craving towards a pleasurable experience and aversion towards something that we don't like. So the feeling is, it becomes important, and mindfulness practice on feeling, focused on feeling, will allow us to be less extreme in our reaction to, pleasure and pain and, happiness and suffering, so that there is less kind of anxiety, because, underlying craving is a lot of anxiety, and also, and along with it also comes jealousy and many of the other problems. So beyond body, one needs to tackle the attachment to feeling. So that's the second part. And then if we go deeper, again, where do these attachment to feeling come from? Why are we reacting to feelings, pleasurable and unpleasurable, in this way? We will come to recognize that underlying this is really our state of mind, different disturbed states of mind and various states of mind. And also, a large part of the attachment is constructed by the mind's attraction towards an object and sort of, a construction or a superimposition of attractiveness to things in the world. So it's the mind that brings conceptualization and adds attributes to things. And it's the mind that is doing a lot of the work. So by looking at the mind, one brings differentiation, because mind is not one monolithic state. We need to bring differentiation to mind that are more in the category of attachment leaning, attraction leaning, mind that are more in the category of aversion, which manifest in extreme form as anger, hatred, and so on. So when we are able to move from feeling to mind, we are now looking at a deeper level of the states of motivation, intention, and emotions, and so on. So now, when we move from the mind meditation to the mind object, mental objects, then we are really getting to a subtler state where, in fact, even though the text may not explicitly state this, but we are moving towards something like the teaching on anatta or shunyata as presented in the Madhyamaka teachings. Because what we come to recognize is that many of the things that we believe to exist out there are constructs of our mind. And by recognizing constructs as constructs, we also recognize that there is nothing solid with the reality, independent existence out there. And in this way, the whole basis for attachment will be undermined. So we can see in the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, a progressive or progression of deeper understanding of body moving to feeling, then to mind, and then finally to mental objects or phenomena.
Tadi, nedi indarish, tenje samtangi yore, zawashiru, ada chushu di, tenje zhawa zho ngakbo meba, kemeba, chani ngolo tene nyambe cheba kengani, ngakbo meba kemeba, ane tulu tene cheba meba, tak meba, ane zhong, yu zhong meba, ane oha meba, zhong meba, ane dala tene tate temi tenshimi. Oda tedebi zhawa tada nyawa shiwe tsenji chengi, ane zhe tongpa nikan toos, ane samtachi. Tenga yindarish, ada zawashiriku chushi di kyawani, yindarish samtangi zawa sanje manam ki tamba tada chachalo sayada di, ane kobe savushivishtuwa.
So in my own daily practice, one of the key meditations I do is based on the opening salutation verse in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, treatise on the middle way, where Nagarjuna pays homage to the Buddha for teaching the truth of dependent origination in terms of emptiness. And there, in the Sholaka, Nagarjuna talks about how the teaching on no self or emptiness is presented from the point of view of the nature of things themselves, where the belief in the arising and cessation in an intrinsic way is negated. From a temporal perspective, then belief in enduring permanence or believing in annihilation after existence is negated. And then from the point of view of activity, intrinsic going and intrinsic coming are negated. And then from the point of view of labeling, then the grasping to things as being distinct or separate or identity and difference is negated. And then Nagarjuna goes on to say that to you, the great teacher who has taught this truth of dependent origination in terms of the absence of these, extremes, I pay homage. So this is an important stanza for me, and I chant it regularly, daily basis, and meditate on its meaning.
야, 다처럼 조질리.
So we will now have the question and answers. Yeah.
We are indeed rejoiced at the teaching by His Holiness. This is indeed a blessed teaching program to have a great teacher by His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, to teach and share with us this progressive path to realization through the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So we have many questions from the monastic as well as ladies from audience to ask His Holiness. But due to time constraint, we can only take a few questions, and your understanding is very much appreciated. So this is a gentle reminder for you. When you ask the question, please unmute the mic. And after questioning, remember to mute again the mic and keep the video open. We shall keep the room calm and creating a conducive learning environment so that our mind feel with joy and happiness. Your Holiness, Venerable Pundarit Sri Punyo from Thailand is not available now. So allowing me to ask the question on his behalf. His Holiness, do you have any advice for Dharma learners to know we are on the right path? Thank you.
다들 제발 산지기 취사디 대버지고 모임 콘 조단의 일이 상당고 이들자는 게 로송셔도 잘 개셔버리 에네 투중기 싫어 섬중기 싫어 곰중기 싫어 쓰는 도 슬레임 것도가 서서 토마 터섬 지하디 시부지 개셔버리셔 에네 장수 추조즈 다 지금 발리기 흉인들이 아니 레자가 흉인들이 되게 로소 나야디 숙셔스 나로 나서는 쉬야이.
So, when we are talking about the path and Dhamma practice in the Buddhist context, we are talking about an approach of a spiritual path that is not based on devotion and faith alone. What is required also is an understanding and knowledge. So this is very important for the Buddhist path. And here, as I explained yesterday, there is an understanding that a genuine understanding of the Dharma arises in a gradual way through the 3 stages of understanding of first through study and learning, second through contemplation and integration, and third through meditative cultivation. So my request to all of my colleagues, Dharma friends, is to really not ignore the importance of studying, to study the Dharma, whether it is Pali text or whatever Sanskrit tradition or whatever tradition that you are engaged with. It is important to study and cultivate the knowledge and then contemplate. That is something that I would like to share.
안다 디 제르미스 숨말베 당부자진 토바 망도제 바도 중루 탐제 담버셔 타마니즈 건도 냠솔라 그게 담버제베 쳐동어 사디 다 님부 뒤셔버셔.
So, for example, the great Tibetan master Tsongkhapa, the 14th century master, sums up his biography, autobiography in the following way. He said, at first, I cultivated, wide learning through study. And secondly, I ensured that all the teachings of the Buddha dawned upon me as personal instructions. And then third, I then engaged day and night in meditative cultivation. And in this way, I've been able to dedicate all of my virtues to the flourishing of the Dharma and well-being of sentient beings. So that really sums up what a true practitioner's life should look like.
태서 맞으나 태워 매베 공부니 럭둥 차를 제고 자스 진짜 숨수요래.
So there's a Tibetan saying that a meditation without learning is like someone with no fingers trying to climb a rock.
Oh yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Venerable People Kamo Kesopon from Thailand to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Venerable, with my highest respect to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, refer to the world crisis, and many people, they got a problem and they don't know how to find a way to make them peacefulness. So my question is, how we apply the Maha Satipatthana Sutta to make them become a peacefulness again? Thank you.
Di tagi anda shusumuri lu champanyi sha. Ene tene cho champanyi sha. Tene sem champanyi sha. Tene chu champanyi sha se dos da thoma rabache. Tene lu le da sem dos ya char zhu yore. Lu champanyi sha, cho champanyi sha, sem champanyi sha. Tene ne chu champanyi sha se de dos samdana. 좀 전에 얘기했듯이 가서 지금 머름기 진짜 루트리아 티베나 시전에 타마 라반에도 야오시티도가 저상 안에서 디삼다다 디로종제 아니 디도네 이 삼다다 셔버주나 다가 저기도
So as already I already mentioned how when practiced properly, the Satipatthana, the four foundations of mindfulness, can be a very powerful path. We already talked about how contemplation on the body, bringing mindfulness and awareness onto the body, can really create a basis for living a more peaceful life. And when you look at the Satipatthana, a structure, what we see is a gradual progression. First, from the focus on the body, which is easier and it's more obvious. The object is more evident and obvious. Then gradually moving into feeling, which is still comparatively subtle, but compared to mind, it's still easier to focus on. And then moving on to mind, which is subtler, and then gradually to the mind objects of the mind. So in this way, there's something very beautiful in the natural progression from what is easier and more evident and obvious object to a progressively subtler and elusive object. And if you think about it, this is truly a great compassion and kindness on the part of our teacher, the Buddha. It's almost as if he laid out a path where we are being instructed from the beginner stage, like a kindergarten and a primary school education, then gradually being led us through the advanced higher levels of education. So if you can afford to spend time, study, and then engage in contemplation, there will be the basis for a peaceful mind and peaceful life.
아주 부인하려야 아니 근주 부디 자시다 아니 땡주 부디 인기스 저래 어디 디디게 로 장다들이 배 패싱에 들로토리 생리도 tumbo 뭐에는 tum보전 또 스마 지단지 쇼야고래샤 다 개지시 소소 롬니자데 배 개심부리
So in the Tibetan tradition, for example, our canonical collection is quite large. So the Sutta collection or the scripture attributed to the Buddha contains over 100 volumes. And then the commentarial collection, which is known as Tengyu, contains over 200 volumes. And I often tell people, which I truly believe, that if you look at the content of these teachings, they are actually very close to a scientific way of thinking about things. it's really about understanding the nature of reality, understanding the nature of our own existence. So by spending time to cultivate the knowledge, to study them, and then bring them into contemplation is a worthy pursuit.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Dr. Nima Senaragne from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Morning, His Holiness Dalai Lama. Ayubowan. My question is, breathing is an involuntary action. Don't you think if you make it a voluntary action, will slow down our creative and active mind, diverse in mental energy to an unnecessary task? Thank you very much. Bhoma Stuti.
다디 우중우 장장 개수부지게 말와 가당한서 우중 그뒤네 있다 그 조차 년도 갖고리네 우중 용구여 봐 자상가다 sem기 또 우리야 미니 아니 심파 네트도 샤나 아니 sem기다 가서 그렇게 잡아니 월샤와 디도 남중 가서 로디 베트칼 미국 드럼 멘탈도 토르테 하버도에 가서 공연 시험을 근데 치르기 수저로 사월을 미네 아니 로들레 연구여 봐 미긴치고 봐. 다 예루디 거라 삼다 중구여 봐. 다 예루디 아니 공연 시험에 되게 로로 차대버 디디기 쉬고 뭐시 버체 거라 예루 거란 거 간에도 sesam rigsam di dos pa nyambar shawa surgery do samtana dependo doga. What is
the point is it's the point of mindfulness, of breathing meditation, is not that breathing is such a sacred thing or it's something that is special or something amazing. The point is to recognize something that we naturally and normally do as part of our human existence. And by using that natural human activity, effortless activity, as a way of anchoring our attention training. So what we are doing is we are bringing conscious attention to something that we do effortlessly by using that experience as a way of anchoring our attention. So when we are able to anchor our attention, then we learn to apply our mind. We learn to cultivate the mental discipline, because otherwise, what happens is that, most of the time, our mind chases after the sensory objects. So of course, we have 5 sensory consciousness, and then we have the mental consciousness. All the 5 sensory experiences are always chasing after external objects of the 5 senses. And even the mental consciousness, which is manas, the 6th mental faculty, is supposed to be really about mind. But even then, for most of the time, the mental faculty also, mental consciousness also chases after what the sensory experiences give you. So we tend to be so externally oriented. So by choosing to consciously focus on a breath, what we are doing is to learning a skill to be able to refrain from chasing after the senses and retain the mental consciousness and cognition to remain at the manas level. And in this way, what happens is a kind of a quietening of a mind takes place. Gradually, as the mind rests and settles, we then begin to experience what consciousness is, which is pure experience in the form of luminosity, just simple awareness. And in this way, one could say one almost is able to cultivate what could be called a state of equipoise. So that, and when we're able to cultivate that kind of ability to consciously apply our mind through a disciplined attention, there's a real benefit. There's a real benefit from this.
Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Ms. Chitani Barra Surya from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Your Holiness, it's look like that there is an inseparable connection between Chittanupassana and Dhammanupassana. Why is it not possible to make them one? Thank you very much.
Yeah, some Chabani Shasati Migu Chi Suzur Sobat membership. Kanda Yulutine some Sazam Rizam Jigi Lodi Gala some Pagita native Chani. Ding la Chichen Song. That in a Dindrig Sem Digi, any she drawn the Dindrig Puggy Taxer to say you do any some Gigi Udrag and Metawada, any other Dindrig Jigby Chichen sometime and do Jidan doing our digital Lord Ling Gurva, any church of Shati Leomage. Some Tabanchas, the Chichen sorry. Then a church of Shati did any casualty to some done. That's also church of Shati. That's some Tabanchating and the Chichen song.
So one way of looking at the relationship between mindfulness on the mind and mindfulness on the mental objects or mind objects is to really view the two, mind and mental objects, as basis and its attribute. So when you are cultivating mindfulness on the mind, what you are seeking is some ability to recognize what the mind itself is. And in order to do that, one needs to be able to move beyond, sort of objectification of body or attachment to feelings. One needs to sort of move beyond those two stages and then find a way to quieten one's mind and then remain equipoised and try to sort of experience that state of absence, which is just a clear knowing and pure awareness. So it's like the basis, and then the mindfulness on the mind objects is more like then reflecting on the attributes of that mind. So for example, like when you analyze the going and coming of that mind, when you analyze the arising and cessation of that mind, that movement, then we begin to recognize attributes like impermanence, no self, and so on. So ultimately, the most important practice is the fourth patthana, practice, the fourth mindfulness, which is the phenomena, the nature of reality. So in simple way, one can say that the relationship between these two is that first one is establishing the basis for recognizing the mind, and then the fourth one is now recognizing the attributes, abiding on the attributes of the mind, such as impermanence, no self, and so forth.
And those some ships has not some charak yacha yori, and Ravolubu some, and a numerous sims. Chazanga. Ravolubu Samlaya, and Rashida Jukundo di Shigduga. Now Rashiga Topo Sosum, Cheve Rashiga Topo Shivju, Nedo Rashiga Topo Dun. Chena Oda, Rashida Topo di Badu, Gabe, Jelia, and sim sesam rigzamgi, and that area, and Naji Tosum Sen Shesha Diri, or Dendregita, or Sim Tara Yachadua, that those Yuru Kombaina, any Gali Samaya, Diri, Saw Yon de Ajita, any Naji Tosum Munzidu Yontiachi. The other Sedu Negogi, any Tombosum Samtang, the Yala Peasants Nemedo, Yala Chigo, Kumji Tangu Tansadi, any the Nikube Kudulia, any Semgi, Rabati the Bagale, Galepa, Shine, Tomo Gomeshiva the Baga, then a Chawa, Lui, then a Charadi Bado, Strategy, Thomas Semdi, Verse Shatiach. This is a Kumji Dosiana, any could. 지 서로 연대하다 지금 생차라가 문제지 돼야지 판단하래.
So in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, in understanding the nature of mind, as I mentioned yesterday, there is even a discussion of recognizing different levels of subtlety of mind and consciousness, and the movement of the mind connected with its energy. So, for example, there is an understanding of how we can move from grosser level of mind, such as the sensory experiences, to the manas. And within the manas, there's a lot of conceptual processes, thought processes, and those are still grosser level. And there's a whole list of what is referred to as the 80 conceptions that are indicative of different states of mind. So each of these are correlated to a progressive level of deepening. So there is quite a lot of distinctions, and meditators, the yogis, actually learn to recognize what the indications of the different levels of dissolutions are. And part of that practice involves using sleep as a way of training the mind, because when we begin to fall asleep, our sensory modalities are less active. So the mind is already settling down and quietening down. And so then, yogis actually use the sleep experience and process as a way of recognizing how the mind is behaving, how the mind is expressing itself in different levels of subtlety. And in this way, as you go into the actual sleep, you are still able to maintain your awareness. And then, of course, the aim is eventually to be able to recognize when these deeper states arises naturally, especially such as at the point of death, as mentioned yesterday. So, for example, like the 4 stages, each of them are associated. The first 3 stages are associated with specific numbers, and they are referred to as the stage of appearance. So each of these first 3 stages are associated with specific numbers, altogether making 80 conceptions, which then dissolve and culminate in the experience of clear light. So when the 3rd stage, which is associated with the 7 conceptions, cease, then what is referred to as the innate mind, the innate mind arises. And that is the most basic, most fundamental state of consciousness. And the yogi, an experienced yogi, will be able to still maintain awareness at that stage.
Oh, yeah. Next.
Thank you, His Holiness. We now invite Ms. Praboda Nirukshi from Sri Lanka to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Your Holiness, I am asking, is Satipatthana meditation samatha or vipassana? Thank you.
디 신대다 항동스야디 미국권에 요치기 요마리 코칸다 미국당 거 토네 신내스럽도 잡아 마시버체 심지시도 나야 내베토네 삼다 에네 항동스럽도 잡아치야 치기 신내사디 에네 가서다 심지시도 내버 내 드라지다 항동스야디 에네 신의 제시도 내배 토네 에네 유로 소소도 싫고 자야디 자곰 는 항동사들이
So,
자본이샤는 이자연구리.
So the primary distinction between shamatha and vipassana or vipassana, tranquil abiding and insight, it's not defined by differences in the object of meditation. The object of meditation can be the same. It is differentiated by the style of meditation. So in the shamatha type meditation, the main approach is a single pointedness and settledness of mind and focus. So there is no discursivity. Whereas vipassana style meditation involves inquiry, like, more the wisdom aspect of the mind, inquiry, analysis, discursiveness, and critical, inquiry. So, and this is why in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, we speak of non-discursive meditation or resting meditation and analytic or discursive meditation. And they are correlated to the shamatha style or vipassana style. And you need to combine both. So for example, in the Satipatthana practice, we see both of these approaches are used in a combination way. So Satipatthana practice, the mindfulness practice contains both elements of both tranquil abiding and insight.
Oh yeah. Now next, get away.
Thank you, His Holiness. There's still remaining two more questions from the floor. We now invite Venerable Arloka, Myanmar, to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Good morning, Your Holiness. My name is Arloka from Myanmar. I'm very happy getting opportunity to ask question to you. So today my question is, Your Holiness, when people ask you conflictable question or the negative question, how do you apply mindfulness, sati, not to be angry? Thank you very much, Your Holiness. Thank you.
디도 가게 요마래. 미자가 캐버스 아니 가서 그래. 또좀 잠만 먹고 싶고 또 순제. 아니 변한다 우모주고 쇼데 대이 시신 사무 지금되는 공급 일이 겨우이 내가 또 준되는 산재천야 현지도수 최민주 쓰네 수선에 아니 인인의 초기랑보다 아니 최기 잡고로 소보도 저디 아니 산재성부샤르디 민장 다요상 그 대코는 일이 캔 투수요 말해서 소도가 또 커도 숨비어를 모두 돼 먹을 게 계속 말봐 이 심주셔야돼 캔원즈 순나로리아 컨저스이버도 저디 심주셔야돼 빼게시 모르셔
So when questions like this are asked, to me personally, it doesn't really bother me, and because I actually admire the critical inquiry tradition that is part of the great Nalanda Indian tradition, where there is a lot of debate back and forth. So debate is the primary. Can someone mute microphone. So so the debate is a primary modality in which discourse takes place. So the critical inquiry, exchange back and forth, is part of that tradition. For example, the 7th century great master Chandrakirti, in his Entering the Middle Way, towards the end, actually explicitly says, after having explained his philosophy of emptiness and his interpretation of Nagarjuna's teachings, says that the profound truth that has been presented here is so profound that even some great learned ones who have spent so much time studying the Dharma have been unable to fathom this truth. And in that list, he includes great masters like Vasubandhu and Dignaga and Dhammakirti as well. So this is the tradition that I come from. So critical inquiry and debate is part and parcel. So I don't get annoyed or bothered by difficult questions. Yeah.
His Holiness, this is the last question. We now invite Venerable Dr. Diti Sampanno from Indonesia to ask your question to His Holiness. Please unmute your mic, please.
Honorable Sir, Your Holiness, Namo Buddhaya, my respectful to Your Highness. I'm very happy I can join this teaching, and then I have some experience about Satipatthana. Actually, my question is about Dhammaduta, but before I heard that there is some audience, she asked about this Dhammaduta too, and then my question is, how about how to practicing vipassana or satipatthana during we have some ritual ceremony. Sometimes because we must unite our mind and our mental body, then but in other time we must reciting of parita or mantra or etc. Like this.
패지디 아다 메다 동에 동남미 시우디 패지 척이었어래. 디신 메다 레동에 동에는 담에송 챤에다 구림도 선로되기도 가다다 토마 지금 메다고 슬브드잖아. 맞다 가서래. 레 다보버솔에 있는 지 셔트야르지. 애는 그 기지 유르하다 드즈제디 코 뭐 지코로 때문에 정주지 매대버지 곧 규도께 몽골로 때네 용과지 매다 아니 다디 지당 아주도 셰인도잖아 가다 기지 직줘야 되디 매다고 정신 아니 다디 알아서 다대지 루심이나 당들이 셰인도잖아 동해 정신 매다 동해 다 디버 정신 야고 자요나 아니 동보다 디도 롱 저버부 아니 다 동보다 대니 녀를 렘베 류디디에 아니 그게 동보지기 가다 가사가 담에다 취지 담에 고미야디 패지 리기야리.
So in the case of the fourth Satipatthana, the fourth one, which is the meditation on mind to object, in my personal understanding is that what is crucial is really contemplation on the four attributes of suffering, truth of suffering, impermanence, nature of suffering, dukkha, and empty, and then no self. So, and those four are actually, there's a kind of a progression from one to another. So the first one is impermanence. And impermanence is something, even though the subtle level of impermanence is difficult to, experience, but at least on the grosser level, impermanence is something that we can easily point to and easily, relate to, because we know things in our life, things around us, they break, they come into being, they're dependent on other factors, they come and go. And then by reflecting upon impermanence, one thing that will become clear as you deepen your contemplation is that impermanence indicates there is no autonomy, because impermanence means something is dependent upon causes and conditions. And anything that is dependent upon causes and conditions cannot have ultimate autonomy or independence. And once you recognize that, this can open up to, especially in relation to our own existence, understanding of the suffering. And then once you deepen our understanding of suffering, nature of suffering, which is actually having no control over our own fate because of karma and afflictions, then, we will recognize that in this kind of reality, there is no place for a real owner, a real agent, a real self. And if there is no real self, then how can there be possessions belonging to that real self? And in this way, ultimately from the Indo-Tibetan tradition point of view, it is pointing towards the teaching of shunyata, emptiness of all phenomena. So in my understanding, the fourth, Satipatthana practice, the fourth mindfulness practice really seems to be pointing towards the fundamental truths of our existence and reality.
This also significant neither something gore. Kibusami chumai, memelung and nangame. Namshi me, women, correct. Umarichon. Kibusami chumai, memelung, nangame. Namshi mai, women, teleshana, kibukongs. That the Tom de Gun, Kibu come to do which Yanda Mai, Chidawa, Tishin come the and Dushin Yanda need to means. What are they? And you're not seeing some tangore. Those for some time, do any sing I lu, I sem, I nasani, Tanya Duko, the Kanta de Dambore, you're the ine, I lu the I sem, I nasing, Tagujang, not some time, do any churning year made the chicky. That day, any. Samsabada, the Regi, the Umurungi Soro, Senshi Yigi Namshi Seni, the Yiludine, Kansagi, she put Dakshiru, Senshi to send sewing Yari. That thank you, Lugi, Didi, Minja Tayo Sam Mado, or Pugi, Yuying on the Trubushi Tanameva. At Umujubi City Shaya Urisha. Kadarang send you then you tell a good overjibishir. Don't you overjibit you in tennis with the singing? Consume over the Namjana, Tini Dajan, Guru Surudo, Nani Moy, Tishik Dengi, Tanya Dala number Chemisha. Tini goes to book and she get other Shelly Jaw remember. Read the Tanya Tanya remember 2 Jaw and Imo Yursa. That the Shivu Chig, when you know something got that day, or Shivuj Kashim Burisha.
So in my own meditation practice on a daily basis, I chant this, certain stanzas from Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, Ratnavali, where he says that the person is neither the earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, and so on. So he goes through the 6 elements that make up our existence and says none of these are the person. But if none of these are the person, where is the person? The person isn't independent of them either. And then he goes on to say that the person is, the concept of person arises only in dependence upon the combination of these elements. And these 2 stanzas are really powerful because it points out very powerfully the sort of the assumptions that we normally make is unfounded. When we talk about my body, my feeling, my speech, we assume there is an owner, that is me, who actually, owns these, to whom speech, mind, and body belongs to. But when you examine using this kind of analysis that Nagarjuna presents us, we don't really find, who these things belong to. There is no person. But having said that, on the conventional level, on the basis of everyday experience and day-to-day popular convention, it is true. There is me and there is you. A person has feelings, a person has speech, and so on. But then the question arises, what exactly is that person? When we say I, what is the term referring to? What is the thought I am referring to? So on this question of what exactly is the person, there's a lot of discussion in Buddhist tradition. For example, Chittamatra, the mind-only school, and other traditions, accept that the person is a construct, but what the concept of person is referring to is the continuity of the consciousness. But Madhyamaka Prasangika basically reject all of this, attempt to find something objectively real as the true referent of the term person or the thought I am, and basically says that the existence of person can only be understood at the level of nominal reality, as part of our conventions, part of the constructions that we, as part of our everyday experience, construct as for our convenient use for our everyday experiences. But there is nothing beyond this level of conventional reality which is objectively real. That is the reference of the person. So and here, Chandrakirti has powerful arguments, particularly in entering the middle way. There's a key section where he presents three important consequences for those who believe there is something that is objectively real out there. And Chandrakirti presents these contradictions to any notion of believing in something independent and intrinsic reality that is out there, that has an objective basis. So those teachings are really powerful, and in my own personal practice, I contemplate them deeply on a daily basis. So thinking of this, what we find in Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, treatise on the middle way, there are two stanzas which is really provides a grand summary of the teaching on Shunyata, where he says that, that whatever is dependent originated, that we call and declare to be empty. And what is empty is dependently designated, and this is the middle way. And then, therefore, there is nothing that is there is nothing that is dependently originated. There is nothing that is not dependently originated, and there is nothing that is not empty. Because there is nothing that is empty. So those two, stanzas really provide a very grand summary of the importance of the teaching on emptiness. So when I mention names like Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, particularly the two of them, I feel very close to them. There's a sort of a deep emotional connection. And I feel almost as if, especially in relation to Nagarjuna, when Nagarjuna was alive and active in the 2nd century, I may have been one among those who are in the far corners in his congregation, sitting somewhere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, His Holiness. we have come to an end of our Day 2 teaching program by His Holiness. Indeed, we have a wonderful and fruitful 2-day teaching program listening to His Holiness, the encouraging and inspiring Dhamma talk given at the right time and be able to associate with the great masters. Just like what His Holiness has said, we are followers of the Buddhas, but over years, due to differences in respective cultures and lack of communication, interaction, and dialogue among Buddhist traditions, particularly in between Pali tradition and Sanskrit traditions, we are as if separated, with no communication at all, and sometimes misunderstanding occur. However, we are very blessed living in this modern technological era. It seems there is a revival in our interaction again, having opportunity to learn from each other and get to know each other. All this interaction helps to promote for a long-lasting benefits and happiness of the Buddha sasanas. Though we are coming from different traditions, the teaching of the foundation of mindfulness is there. The practice and the path is there. One practice, there is only one taste experience. That is a taste of liberation. That is a cessation of suffering. That is Nibbana. Therefore, the path is one. Pardon me if I'm wrong. There is no Mahayana, no Theravada, no Vajrayana. There is only the teaching of suffering and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So before we end for this wonderful and a very fruitful 2-day teaching program, we would like to invite the most venerable Narang Panawe Ananda Nagatero, Secretary General, Asgiriya chapter of Siang Mahanikaya, Sri Lanka, to give a closing remarks. Please unmute your mic, please.
Namo tassa bhagavatu arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Semata Thiruvan Saranai. Atipujya Dalai Lama ඇතුළු ගරුතර මහා සංඝයා වහන්සේ සදහැවතුනි අපි ඊයේත් අදත් මේ දින තුලම අතිපූජ්‍ය දලයි ලාමා විසින් දේශනා කළ සතිපට්ඨාන සූත්‍ර දේශනාවට එම ඉගැන්වීමට අපි බොහොම උනන්දුවෙන් ඇහුම්කන් දුන්නා. මේ පිළිබඳ උනන්දුවක් දක්වන ලෝකයේ බොහෝ කෙනෙකුට උන්වහන්සේගේ මේ දේශනාව තුළින් හොඳ අවබෝධයක් වැටහීමක් ලබා ගන්නට අවස්ථාව සැලසුණා. මේ සතිපට්ඨාන සූත්‍රය ඉගෙනගෙන ඒ උතුම් ධර්ම කරුණු අපි එක් දිනකට පමණක් නෙමෙයි අපේ ජීවිතේ හැමදාම ප්‍රගුණ කළ යුතු බව අපි ඒ තුලින් හොඳට වටහා ගත්තා. තථාගත ලෝතුරා බුදුරජාණන් වහන්සේ වසර 2600කට පමණ පෙර දේශනා කළ මේ සතිපට්ඨාන සූත්‍ර දේශනාව එහි අන්තර්ගතය මම හිතනවා නිතර පුහුණු කිරීම ලෝකයේ අපි බෞද්ධයන් හැටියට හැමෝටම ඉතාම වැදගත් දෙයක් හැටියට. ඒ වගේම මෙම ඉගැන්වීම උදෙක් අපිට ප්‍රායෝගික වශයෙන් භාවිතා කළ යුතු ඉගැන්වීමක්. භාවිතබ්බං වශයෙන් දක්වන ආකාරයට නිතර භාවිතා කළ යුතු ප්‍රගුණ කළ යුතු පුහුණු කළ යුතු ඉගැන්වීමක්. ඒ නිසා මෙවන් වසංගත තත්ත්වයක් ලෝකේ පවතින වෙලාවක අතිපූජ්‍ය දලයි ලාමා විසින් මේ කළ දේශනාව මම හිතනවා අපි හැමෝටම ඉතාම වැදගත් වගේම මේ භාවනාව පිළිබඳ උනන්දුවක් ඇති අයට ඒ පිළිබඳ යොමු වීමෙන් නිතර ප්‍රායෝගිකව පුහුණු කිරීමෙන් අපි හැමෝටම මානසික තෘප්තියක් සතුටක් ඇති කරගන්න ඒ අවස්ථාවක් හැටියට අපි සැලකනවා. ඒ නිසා මේ උතුම් කාර්යය සිදු කළ උන්වහන්සේට අපි බෙහෙවින්ම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම මේ ශ්‍රවණය කළ බොහෝ දිනාට මේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් හැමට සිතක් සාන්තියක් වේවායි අපි සිතින් ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරමු. ඒ නිසා මෙම මහා කාර්ය ලෝකුරා ප්‍රේක්ෂකයින්ට සදහැවතුන්ට ශ්‍රවණය කිරීමට අවස්ථාව සලසා දුන් උන්වහන්සේගේ කාර්යාලයේ සියලු කාර්ය මණ්ඩලයට ඒ වගේම සියලු සංවිධායකින්ට අග්නිගාසියාවේ සම්බන්ධීකරණ කාර්යාලයට සහ තාක්ෂණික කණ්ඩායම් වලට අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී බෙහෙවින්ම ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම දානමාන පිරිනැමු සියලු සදහැවතුන්ටත් අපි ස්තුතිවන්ත වෙනවා. විශේෂයෙන් මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ශ්‍රී ලාංකික භික්ෂුන් වහන්සේලා හැටියට අති පූජනීය දලයි ලාමා තුමාට අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වැඩ සිටින අති උතුම් දලදා හඳුරන්ගේ ආශිර්වාද විශේෂයෙන් අද උඳුවපුර 15ක් පොහොව දවස ජයශ්‍රී මහ බෝධීන් වහන්සේ ලංකාවට වැඩම කළ දිනේ ඒ උතුම් ජයශ්‍රී මහ බෝධීන් වහන්සේගේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් රත්නත්‍රයේ ආශිර්වාදයෙන් උන්වහන්සේට නිදුක් නිරෝගී සම්පන්නිය චිරජීවනයේ ලැබේවායි අපි ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා. සුඛී දීඝායුකෝ භව.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Pali chujuda, the lecture chuju, samolog, kanda tao karta ke chakya shisad, meda dunga tong dame shisad, tao karta ke chakya shi, tinga to samolo tumung tone, da, bagi, kaya cha, da, ishisha cha de yore, meda dunga tong dame shi.
All the followers of the Buddha, when it comes to the understanding the nature of reality, we share our adherence to embracing what can be referred to as the 4 axioms or 3 axioms of Buddhism. These are impermanence, that all conditioned phenomena are impermanent, all contaminated phenomena are the nature of suffering, and all phenomena are empty and are devoid of self. So these, acceptance of these, 3 or 4 axioms is fundamental to all the Buddhist traditions, whether it is Pali tradition or a Sanskrit tradition.
So once again, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, His Holiness. Once again, we are very grateful for His Holiness for teaching us the important teachings on Maha Satipatthana Sutta. And also we thanks to our professional technical teams and many volunteers involved from various parties, from various countries behind a scene to make this teaching program a very great success. His Holiness, we are looking forward to another teaching program by His Holiness. Let us join palm together to express our deepest gratitude to His Holiness and all of you online, and rejoice by saying 3 times in the Buddha's own word, Sadhu, Sadhu,
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Tujiche. 대다 꾸지 쳐서 따로 개원되다 담저 저도